Liesl, I am so excited to have you here. For those people who don't know you and aren't familiar with the companies you've worked with, can you just give me a general description of your background and the companies and kind of a little bit about your history?
Okay, thank you. First of all, that was a very lovely and generous welcome. And I'm very happy to be here with you today to have this conversation. My background is that I was already a little bit of an international traveler from when I was a child because I was born in the States, but to Scottish parents. So the first 4 years of my existence were outside of Detroit. And then my parents got divorced, and I moved to a small island in Scotland, 40 square miles of it. That was all. And that's where I grew up. So culturally, I'm Scottish. But I went to university in Glasgow, and I was picked up to go on a special fast track leadership international program down in London with a company called British Telecommunications, which had just been privatized. And so they were looking to compete for the first time in their life. They had competition. So I worked with them in the strategy department where we prepared the board papers for the BT board. It was a fantastic education in how businesses work and how strategy gets developed because you could see all of the products, the pricing, the services, the communications, and how that translated into money, into profit, which is what the board primarily talks about. I then went to the customer communications unit, where I was sort of headhunted internally for that, just as they were about to launch a campaign, which was the largest campaign at that time in the UK called It's Good to Talk. That was a great education because I was a client of the best agencies, every kind of agency. So, on the one hand, you'd go to research agencies, ad agencies, sorry, not digital, direct marketing. Digital wasn't a thing yet. But also going with people who bought photography and learning how to buy great photography. What does great photography look like? How do you write photography briefs? It was the most brilliant education you could have, and we did an Ashridge MBA at the same time. From there, I had 10 years of corporate life in London, working with brands such as Ogilvy and Mather, O&M, the top advertising agency, part of the WPP group. I worked for Virgin, who have airlines, financial services companies, holiday companies, and people might have heard of Richard Branson. He was my boss's boss. Um, but then after 10 years of that, I realized that corporate life wasn't for me. I had great successes and many failures too, from which I feel I learned more. And I decided I wanted to go traveling. So young people used to backpack, but when I graduated, we didn't do that. So at the age of 31, I packed up my Donna Karan sportswear and my Estee Lauder sunblock because I'd been working for 10 years and went on the backpacking trail back in the days when there were no mobile phones. So it felt dangerous, it felt exciting, and I spent 18 months traveling around the world and decided I wanted to stay and see more of it. And so that's how I ended up in Asia.
Wow. Okay, so you split your life right now between Scotland and Asia. Can you talk about that just a little bit and why you've made that choice?
It's interesting because it wasn't actually a choice. So
Oh,
I lived, having traveled for 18 months, I wanted to stay in Asia. I imagined that I would learn Mandarin and go work in China. So I thought that Thailand was a good place to do that because, well, a couple of reasons. First of all, Thailand's not a former colony. And so it doesn't have those colonial changes and things that happen to the local culture when it's been a colony of one of the European nations. So I liked the fact that Thailand had never been a colony, and also that everyone leaves Thailand out. People think of Thailand as the sand pit of Southeast Asia. It's a place you go on holidays, you go have vacations there, but there's a lot more to Thailand than that. And also because I could go sailing.
oh,
There were three reasons. Um, but when I was there, I ended up getting some work there. I lectured for 2 years. I also had some clients, ended up doing that full time, setting up a company, which I could because I had a US passport. And you're allowed to be 100% owner of a company in Thailand. There's a treaty of amity there. So that came in handy.
hmm.
And I ended up being there. In fact, when I landed there, I didn't go back to Europe for 9 years. So 9 whole years without going back to Europe, just over there. And I came back for a friend's wedding. and lived in Thailand until we came back at the beginning of the COVID, initial COVID period,
Oh,
to stay in an apartment in Edinburgh, and we got locked down there. And due to sort of personal circumstances with health and my husband's circumstances, who I met there, we ended up being here now for 4 years. So we would like to keep the East and West thing going, but we didn't mean to leave Thailand. It kind of happened to us by happenstance, is the word, while we're here at the moment more than we might normally be. And so the reverse culture shock has actually been another thing to look at for us.
wow. That your life is so phenomenal. Oh my God. Um, okay, so I'm going to jump into a couple questions. And feel free to discuss these with me and let this go wherever you'd like it to go. You mentioned that at some point in your career, a very powerful thought sunk in, and that you were not the cultural baseline, or you weren't the set of norms and behaviors and assumptions basically within a typical office culture. Can you explain what happened at that moment and the realization and how you navigated through that epiphany that you had, both personally and professionally?
That's a really good question. And I think there's a few people who have gone abroad who I've spoken to who say exactly the same thing after a period of time. We need to understand when we're living in other cultures, there are so many different ways that we interact with other cultures and on so many different levels. So for me, I started off with the classic thought. So, being a strategist and a planner, I thought, okay, you'll start off with desk research into that culture. So, when you do desk research, you're looking at stats. Nowadays, you could look at AI, which is another interesting bias that'll be introduced into in certain analyses of cultures. But you look at mental models, don't you? You look at
Mm.
things, you've got your onions, you've got your icebergs, you've got your graphs. We all like to have mental models of things so that we can put labels on things and so that we can understand how things relate to each other. You look at things like Hofstede or Hall, and they are sort of research based sound bits of work into culture. So Hofstede was the one who came up with the 9 different cultural dimensions. So things like power distance, masculine or feminine culture, etc.
Mm.
There's a lot of truth in what he said. He actually looked at IBM.
Hmm.
And what he looked at was that IBM has its own company culture. But it's funny, isn't it? Because when you put IBM into different countries, that company culture changes because of the
Mm.
local culture into which it's steeped. And
Hmm.
it's a measurement of those differences with which he was interested. And there's a lot of people like a guy called Martin Carafa, who knows an awful lot about this. But it's a really interesting way to start studying this other culture. So, like most people of my sort of mindset, it's like, how can I learn as much as I can by looking at these mental models? But looking at it from a creative perspective as well, which is interesting for your kind of audience, there's a wonderful Chinese German illustrator called Xie Li, and she's Chinese but ended up living in Germany, and she
Mm.
did beautiful diagrams, beautiful simplistic. Not simplistic, simple diagrams to explain how she felt the cultural difference between Germany, a very sort of highly regulated, on time, etc. culture, quite individualistic, versus the Chinese culture that she grew up with. So she had diagrams which showed visually what the differences were. And I found that fascinating because without words, just using pictures, you could understand these differences. I highly recommend that people go and take a look at them. She's called Xie Li, Jia Li. And it's really beautiful what she did. You can then think that these theories, like any theory of anything, it explains some of something, but not everything.
Hmm.
Theories can give you a good foothold, a good starting point, but they'll never explain anything that's complex. It can only ever be a starting point. It gives you some practically useful things. but it tends to take the form of dry statistics,
Right.
things that you should and you shouldn't do,
Hmm.
or labels that you can try to attach to things, but you may interpret them rightly or wrongly. And things are not always black or white or this way or that way.
Hmm.
There was a guy called Gertz who talked about thick culture, where it's you can understand things on a thin level, but thick culture goes deeper and has a different approach. It's more anthropological.
Oh, okay.
So that was a really good starting point, and it's one that I would recommend to people. So first of all, do some desk research. It's really useful to know how many people, the religion, what people eat. It's really useful to get some label for things. So power distance, whether people how they relate to family, that it's interesting. But when you're out in the wild, how does that help? Because you're trying to exist within a culture. And it's always different, isn't it? From taking, you can learn the theory of how to do heart surgery, fine. But to actually go and do it is a whole other thing. So
Hmm.
culture is a little bit like that. You can learn the sort of slightly more dry, but important basis of that. But then you have to actually learn how to implement it. So you learn things like the Thai language has 5 tones. You shouldn't use your feet to point at things. You
Mm.
don't wear your shoes indoor. You don't gesticulate too much. We why. But what it doesn't do is actually let you experience what things like the why. You know, when you see people do this, I mean, it's different in India. The namaste is a different thing, but this is the why. So it's interesting. Why depends on who does it first or who does it second. It's a little bit of a
Wow.
power thing, and it's an
Hmm.
age thing, and it's a societal position thing, and how high you put it is also important. So
Oh.
if you're young, if I was doing this to somebody younger, I would do it here because I've got the gray hair now, and you only do it up here if it's for the monarchy or Buddha. And where you do it here, slight indication of how much respect I'm showing you in our social differences, as is the Japanese bow as well, how low and how you hold it. So it can teach you things like that, but they're quite complicated. And
Hmm.
so you need to go on to the next step, maybe, which is step one is desk research, thinking again like a creative or a planner, a strategist or a marketer. The next thing would be primary research. So now let's go out and explore things a little bit more in the wild. But that is all of the caveats of primary research, doesn't it? When you're looking into things. So you've got kinds of validity. So with market research, you've got 9 different kinds of validity, say. So you've got construct validity, internal validity, statistical validity. Asking questions is like, does this research actually capture the thing that it is that I'm trying to research? Does it
Hmm.
actually map onto the thing, or am I describing something else? Do the results reflect the studied phenomenon, the thing that it is I'm trying to study?
Hmm.
When you do research, so you're doing research in the States, Heather, or I'm doing research in the UK or in Thailand or somewhere, it's difficult, isn't it? Because
Hmm.
to use the old example, when you ask people, what do you have for breakfast? They say, I have oatmeals and berries and almonds and oat milk. And then you say, what did you have for breakfast this morning? I'll be like, well, I had a Coke and a Mars bar because I was in a rush. So, there's that classic thing about the distance between the actual research and how people like to perceive themselves, how people answer questions. There's a lot in there. It's the same with cultural studies as well. So you've got a lot of issues when you're trying to do primary research. And I have worked with a couple of companies who've been doing research in Asian companies and help them try to understand how to maybe adapt their research to different cultures as well. Because in sort of Northern European and North American countries, we're much more likely, when we're asked a question, it's much more likely to have an answer which people feel able to be direct. Now, we may hide things, of course, when we answer research questions, and we try to project things about ourselves. I'm a smart person, I'm a clever person.
Oh.
I choose
Hmm.
one. But where you have cultural differences, it can be really hard because we tend to use Western style empirical research methodologies and Karl Popper's theory and all that kind of stuff, whereas that
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily work somewhere else. So, whether you're trying to research a piece of copy, a product design, or understand how happy your staff are in your organization, your team, it's a little difficult because I think it was Heisenberg who said that when you study something, you change it.
Oh.
Observing and changes things. And, I think he was referring to quantum physics, but as with quantum physics, so it is with human beings. By studying something, people are changing their behavior when you're observing them. They can be useful, but you have to think if you want to get deeper and have
Mhm.
thicker understanding, you can go
Mhm.
from desk research to primary research, but then you need to move on to maybe if you're looking at culture to actually traveling.
Mhm.
That can be hard now. So there are ways of doing that. And I can suggest things to people like, for example, you might want to listen to a radio station from another country.
Mhm.
It doesn't always necessarily matter that you understand it, but just listening to it can be really revealing.
Mhm.
Watching TV shows from other places, reading books now, you can get books where you have the language on one side in their language and in your language on the other page. Joining groups. I know people, I mean, I've done it myself. I've actually joined webinars in languages that I don't speak just to see and feel what it's like to be in that culture. Um, and so there's ways of trying to travel without traveling, is what I'm saying. But when you do travel, you're looking at a very biased piece of research because primarily, and I have to say that English speaking people are the worst. Northern European and North American people are the worst. So because we always like everybody's adapting to us, right? And I used to do this
Mhm.
course called cross-cultural adaptation, and it was about like, and that's where this idea, which I'll come back to, which is about, you're not the cultural ground zero. We always think like everyone will adapt to me. So
Mm.
you're dealing usually with people who speak English, people in the hospitality industry. You might be surrounded by people who are of your own culture. You're there for leisure, or if you're there for business, you're being entertained by people from the local culture and they're putting on their best foot, their best face. And you're probably in the central business districts. But if, it isn't a map of the territory, is what.
Mhm. Mhm.
So travel can be interesting, but it is a glimpse and it's another layer, if you like, of understanding that culture. So you've gone from reading about it, perhaps researching, to actually being in it. But another thing you have to be careful of is about like if you go to Florida, you've no idea what the NYC is like, right? If you go to Montreal, you don't know what Vancouver's like. If you go to Rajasthan in India, Tamil Nadu is completely different. If you have people who go to, India or Europe, and I went to Europe and I didn't like it, and you're like, where did you go? And they're like, Norway, and I'm like, have you tried Greece? Like, it's an
Mm.
entirely different thing.
Mhm.
So you have to be aware that that's also snippets. If you go to Bangkok and Phuket in Thailand, you're not observing Thailand, you're observing snippets of it. And so you have to be careful that there's this kind of slightly less serious layer to it if you're just traveling, but it is a great way of observing. And if you're an artist or a problem solver, so
Mhm.
for example, if you look at the way Thai people wrap things. This is another great thing because we're quite didactic in the West. We're always like, we have to be saving the environment. So let's look at plastics. A lot of plastics in Asia, don't get me wrong, but Thai people have been wrapping stuff up in pandan leaves and sticking them with little twigs, and that's how they transport it. And you still buy that on the street, and it'll get served to you in restaurants because now it's kind of cool to have like street.
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
So you can look at those solutions and actually learn things instead of just thinking that you're there to export this kind of Western wisdom. It's just think like, what can I learn? What can I take from it? Smell things, breathe it in, watch people, talk to people. And I'll come back to the old Steve Harrison, who's a wonderful copywriter. Who's in London. I worked with him over a period. I was his client, and then I worked with him at Ogilvy. And Steve always used to say, if you want to be a great copywriter, you shouldn't be listening and watching to the films of Kurosawa. You should be sitting in a cafe
Mm.
listening to the conversation. And when we travel and we're on holiday or we're traveling for business, we tend to be very busy. We tend not to take the moment. to be quiet, use our eyes, use our ears, and just take in what we can over a period of time. So you can do travel where you're going having fun, having margaritas, doing all your stuff. But then if you take time to actually sit down and observe and listen, you'll get so much more from those business trips. Set aside that time just to soak it in by
Mhm.
osmosis. Just let it soak in. Um, it's a funny thing about when I talk about the geography as well, because you think that we do tend to have these lumps like American culture, but there's lots of American cultures.
Mhm.
Thai cultures, there's lots of Thai cultures, like different languages, but we're not always all different. So if you take Japan and you take the UK, on paper, it looks like they're very different cultures, right? The
Mhm.
Japanese and the British
Mhm.
share a lot of things in common. Japan and the UK are large populations on a small space of islands who have to find a way to have privacy without actually having a lot of space.
Mhm.
So, for example, in America or Canada or some of those other countries, you've got a lot of space, physical space. Houses are big, cars are big. People have a large personal space around them. If you go to the UK and Japan, you're kind of shoved up against each other. You don't have much space per person. So, what do we both do? We solve the problems of space and time, is what we all do as humans. And the problem of not having space in Japan and Britain is solved in exactly the same way. So, in Japan and Britain, when you're next to people, you don't make eye contact. You try not to touch each other. You try to keep away from people. So you may have been crammed up together on a train. You're just creating privacy in your own head. You have your own little castle in your own head because you don't have that physical space. In Japan, cars are small. In America, they're huge. In Japan, houses are tiny. In America, they tend to be big. So it's a myth to think that every country is always different. There are some layers of things where you can actually find analogies between those different countries. So just to finish, to come back to a very long answer to this, but we started off with desk research, primary research, and travel. The final way where I came to my understanding of how to go around about cultures was by living in the culture. And that's probably the deepest dive you can take, right? Pack your bag,
Yes.
stay
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Expats, I'm not dissing it. I'm not saying that there's like an Olympics of living abroad, but if you do go and you're an expat, there's a little bit of sliding along the veneer because you're there for an exchange and things are organized for you. So your apartment, there's somebody there to help you understand how to pay your phone bill. There's
Mhm.
somebody there who helps you get your work permit. People will entertain you. And usually you're there in a position of power. So people are quite deferential to you, which is interesting. Whereas if you go as an expat, as not as an expat, but somebody who's actually kind of transplanted there, as I did,
Mhm.
there's more jeopardy. And I always talk about this when I talk about culture. There must be jeopardy.
Can you explain that?
Well, by jeopardy, I mean that going, if you get posted to go and run a design consultancy in
Mhm.
Singapore by a
Mhm.
holding company, or if you work for Mars or Coca-Cola or somebody and you're sent to Beijing to go and run a division there,
Mhm.
you are going there with a different risk profile than to somebody who just arrives there like I did with a backpack and set up my own business, because you have to learn to do everything yourself.
Okay.
And nobody's being deferential to you. Remember, Thailand's not a former colony. They don't care. I love it. I love it. It's great. They're kind of like, this is how we do it. And, deal. Um, so the jeopardy means putting yourselves in position where you're not just in a position of power. You see quite a lot of people go to African, Asian, South American cultures, and they're the boss.
Mm.
They think people love them because they're determined their salary, their promotion, they have more money, they have power. If you go somewhere and you work in a company where you're not the boss in that other culture, way different experience.
Mm,
Try working for someone from that culture. It's like I always talk to Derek Walker about, Derek Walker's all about bringing young Black creatives into
mm,
agencies.
mhm.
I say, well, if people really want to be inclusive or they really want to change the dial, why don't you go and work for a Black owned agency if you're white?
Ooh,
Go and see how
oh,
that feels,
ooh, I love that.
you know,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's real. It's real. There's more
yeah.
jeopardy in it. Make yourself vulnerable.
Mhm.
Put yourself into the hands of people and find your way. And that's where you can really make great connections, but you also reap more as well because you learn so much more living the way you're not living life the way local people do because you are different,
Mhm.
but you're at least doing something which is not 100% easy for you because you're being sort of carried along and sliding along on this veneer of the culture because you're in power. And I think that's what I did. And my life was changed immeasurably for the better because of it. I was often the only white person in the room, as well as being the only woman in the room. So white privilege, but sometimes not so because when you learn to speak the other language, you think people are being deferential, but maybe they're sometimes not. And it's interesting what people say when they don't expect that you speak the language you can understand. Um, but you're also you have this you have to sell your idea,
Mm,
have to evoke some kind of response or information for people, not based on holding privilege as much. You have to learn how to engage with people. So you have to learn deeply how people think, what motivates them, how they feel about things, what they like, what they don't like. And it helps a lot if you're living there in
I
a room.
love that. I love that. That's so beautiful. That was one of my questions. I actually was going to ask you, if you go to another culture and you need to work there and you need to be able to really communicate and collaborate, I think what you're saying is pay attention, be vulnerable, and don't show up with privilege. Do I have that right?
Absolutely brilliantly put. Thank you. You've said it much quicker than I did. I rambled. You've nailed it. Thank you.
I'm just summarizing you. Um, it's beautiful because I think a lot of people, I can only speak to my own culture. In the American culture, we naturally assume privilege, whether we're aware of it or not. And travel is an excellent way to kind of get a bearing on how you are showing up in the world consciously and unconsciously. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, it's I mean, we all have, we all have bias and we can never entirely get over that. But the more we recognize it, the more we can find ways to try and check our own privilege or our own bias, then the better it is. And that's where I kind of came this real realization that I'm not the cultural baseline became a real mantra for me. And I clients that I worked with who would take me aside and say, could you help me with working in a different environment? That was always the thing that I would say to them is the distance between you and them is the same as the distance between them and you.
Mhm.
And the biggest bit of advice I can give to people if you're going to another culture is yes, study the other culture, but don't put them under a microscope like they're an insect and just, like do the desk research, you do primary research. You can, do all these things I've said, but one of the first things you should do, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is look at your own damn self
Mhm.
and say, what about me and my culture might be a point of friction with another culture? Because we're so busy judging other people and saying, oh, this is what they're like, that's what they're like. Oh, there are levers I can pull to change these people. Well, do you know what? It doesn't work in your own culture. You can't manipulate people in your own culture. Why do you think you can do it with people from other cultures? Sometimes things are cultural and sometimes they're not. I find it very easy to argue with British people, with Scottish people, whatever, my culture. So sometimes if I don't agree with someone from another culture, we can attribute it to culture, but it might just be personality or a different perspective. So you really need to think long and hard about how you operate based on your whole self, not just the cultural sort of differences, but what is it about me when I'm in a work environment, whether I'm briefing someone, taking a brief from someone, presenting a solution to something. How does that work in my culture? How might it work in this culture? Examine it in the round. Um, because when you look at other cultures, creatives, leaders, and problem solvers can learn an awful lot from other cultures. And I always think
Mhm.
of it as not just expanding your frame of reference, but almost like giving you different frames of reference that you can
Mhm.
use. It's that powerful. Um, and so I think another point I would add would be language. Now, I have people debate this with me regularly. There's a lot of people who say, I speaking the language is not important. It's not important. And
Oh,
it's always English speakers who don't speak language.
it's true.
Languages, but and I'm like, yeah, but
Yeah.
I understand more in the cultures that I do speak the language than the ones that I don't, because to say that it's not important is ridiculous. Is the way we describe things important?
Mhm.
Yes. Are the words that we use in our own language important? Yes. So the words in their language are important. It's a thing.
Mhm.
It's a big thing.
Mhm.
There's a gap sometimes in if I use words and you use words. So if I use the word harmony, it might mean something slightly different to you and to me, or pick any word, pick any construct. In a different culture, of course, there's the same opportunity for there to be gaps in understanding. In fact, there's more opportunity for there to be gaps in understanding. So you have to understand when I was talking about observing people from other cultures, I think there are visual cues and there are also linguistic and language and communication cues.
Mhm.
You don't have to speak the language, but you have to be aware of how people are communicating because we only have so many tools. We can draw pictures, we can use words,
Mhm.
use
Mhm.
lots,
Mhm.
and they are different in different cultures. So that bridging that communication gap and getting understanding requires a lot of different ways of looking at it. So a good example might be that language, when you're working in another culture, it's a social marker.
Mhm.
So when we talk, well, race and gender are social markers, right? And so is language,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
For foreigners, when people hear me speaking English or they hear me speaking Thai or French or German, they don't know what my social class is because they can't place where my accent is. So if you speak Central sort of French from around a certain part in France, which is considered to be the neutral, or you speak Hochdeutsch, which is High German. You speak Central Thai, not one of the dialects, and then you speak English the way I speak English. People will make judgments, say, okay, she's Scottish, this, that, and the next thing. But if you're in another culture, they don't know how to judge what the social structure is. So it's a really interesting way that other cultures solve that by asking you questions. So whether you're in India or the Philippines or Indonesia or Thailand, people will ask you questions which you'll think are rude, but what they're trying to do is place you on the hierarchy.
Mhm.
They'll
Mhm.
say, how much money do you earn? Um,
Wow.
you know, no, because if you crash your car, in Thailand, if there's two cars hit each other, the person driving the more expensive car is going to pay for sure, even if it wasn't. So people look at you and they're like, we're driving the same car. Who of us is going to pay? But so implicitly, they're trying to work out where you are on the social structure because they have a lot of words in their language for social relationships, much more than we do. Thai is it's interesting. It's a written Indian language from Bali and Sanskrit.
Mhm.
So people who read that script could read some words in Thai, but they wouldn't know what they meant because it's a different spoken language, spoken differently. Spoken is a Chinese language, which is tonal with the five tones.
Wow.
So the five tones get you in a lot of trouble. They got got like a million stories of me humiliating myself and some absolutely wonderful, beautiful Thai people who are always so happy when you mangle their language, being really nice about it.
Oh.
To give you an example, I ordered a coffee one time and I said, which is cafe, sai nom. So cafe and sai is with a nom. And of course, you've got tones. So it's cafe, sai nom. Coffee with milk. Didn't know if I wanted milk. So I said cafe, sai nom. If you say sai and you string it out, it means shake.
Oh.
Nom doesn't only mean milk, it also means breaths. So
Oh
I
no.
literally said to the waitress, can I have a copy and can you shake your boobs, please? No, the whole of the table who were all Thai, they laughed. The waitress laughed because they know their language is hard because you have tones and long and soft vowels. And then when they told me what I'd said, I was mortified. But they said, don't worry about it. It's just funny because it's easy to do in Thai. Very thankful at how kind people are with the language over there. But we have to make sure that when we're listening, even if we don't speak it, that the quality of our listening and the quality of our observation is good. And it's something you have to consciously do
Mm-hmm.
rather than just speaking and broadcasting. We have to
Mm-hmm.
be silent and we have to learn to soak it
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love that so much. I can apply that in so many areas of my life. My brain is exploding.
in.
Um, okay, so I would like to continue the focus, but shift it just a little bit. And I'd like to talk about a female's perspective. We are celebrating Women's History Month this month, and we are thrilled to have you here. We are focusing on some of our favorite female leaders. I would like to ask you about what have you experienced as a female in the industry and what unique challenges what you have faced? Um, and what strategies did you use to overcome those challenges? I know myself personally, I've had a ton. I would love to hear about your experience. And also, we kind of covered this in the cultural context, but is the cultural context different for women than men when you're traveling abroad?
Okay, great questions. So to answer the last one there first, yes, it is different because each culture has a different expression of the gender relationships. Although what I will say that if you go right back to, um, if you think about cultures, if you even go back to something like architecture, the Forbidden City in China is influenced by Confucian thought.
Mhm.
Um, if you look at cafes in Paris are influenced by sort of existential philosophy.
Mhm.
The Alhambra in Spain is influenced is his Islamic
Mhm.
influence in
Mhm.
that thought. None of these ancient theories and philosophies ever have women, do they? They're all
Mm-mm.
boys. So that is a universal truth, which is women have tended not to be that, although there's a lot of matriarchal societies which used to exist and some still do. When you go to another culture, I always try to be respectful. So the first part is I always try and be respectful and look at what the local women do.
Mm.
So if the local women will wear a loose scarf over their head, then I'll do that. So in certain places, I went way up country in India many times. I think I
Mhm.
spent 6 months there once, and I went way up country, and I would occasionally have a little bit of harassment. So what I would do is I would make sure I wasn't exposing my shoulders because that's not something you expose. I was wearing long trousers, and I would put a silk scarf over my head, and I would just put it around here and lower my head because I didn't want the attention. There's no point getting into an argument because that's not what local women do.
Mhm.
But there's a survival mode you go into in different cultures where you, and we do it in our cultures as well. We all know how to keep ourselves safe with the keys in our hands. There's a whole, it's every
Mhm.
culture. I always say no culture is better or worse than another. They're just different. So none of that nonsense about cultural superiority. Um, but you can look in other cultures at how the women behave there But when you go, once again, when you go as a white woman into those other cultures, I have had some privilege. I recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm foreign, I am given permission perhaps to be a bit more outspoken. Um, but then again, I am also used to sitting in a room full of older men in every different culture who will just I will say something and they'll turn around and go to the guy at the end of the table and ask him. You can get that everywhere. That is served at all places in the world. So it's a kind of a universal truth that women
Mm-hmm.
do have are treated differently. Now, I know people and I have friends who will say to me that we can't always blame it on misogyny. But when I'm told that I can't do something because I'm a woman, I'm saying that that's you telling me it's misogyny. Um, and so I'm going to stick the big old misogyny label on that and say, okay. Um, and there's a thing where, they say that if a man fails, his gender's irrelevant.
Yes.
Whereas when a woman fails, it's like, and there's a lot of that around right now in every culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I've also experienced that where, the you're told that you're not ready for something, and there's a guy that you know who is the same as you in terms of experience or ability, and he gets the promotion or he's earning more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I have dealt with a lot of stuff. I'm old enough to remember the 90s where you were literally dealing with physical intrusions
Mm.
and things that were expressed and said. This was in London, were really quite frank, and you had to learn how to handle that. And then it became, as I got older, and I think times changed a bit, it becomes a little more insidious.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a little more not subtle, but it's different. I think Annalisa, who was on your show the last time, was saying that you never quite have your time. So you go from being too young, too young, too young, too old. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think there's definitely a thing now for women of my age, over 50, who are, we were never really allowed to have our full power unless we really grabbed it with both hands when we were younger. And
Mm-hmm.
then we're told now that we're older and that we should shut up and we're not relevant and we become invisible.
Mm-hmm.
How to handle that, I think, is a question of insistence, quiet insistence. I'm very stubborn and I don't give up easily. That might be the Celt in me. We're really
Mm-hmm.
stubborn, like
Mm-hmm.
super stubborn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that serves me well as I get older. I'm like, nah. But there are still rooms you're not invited into, and there's tables you're not invited to sit at. And as lots of people, including Cindy Gallop, would say, it's like make your own damn table and get other people to sit at it. So um, it's changed through time culturally, and it's changed across cultures. But it's also changes with you individually, I think, as your age and you know more about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to own. Certainly for me, I'm a slow learner. It took me a long time to learn what my powers are. And I'm still learning. So I hope that the younger women on who listen to this, including Mel, who's here, hi Mel, great copywriter, learn and own your power as soon as you possibly can, because nobody can take that away from you. You're ace. Own it.
Oh, oh my God, I just got goosebumps everywhere. I'm going to ask one more question I'm curious about, and then I'm going to open up the Q&A. But if there was a place that you felt like you haven't been able to go in your career because of misogyny or timing or all the life stuff, do you, is there somewhere you want to go now that you feel like you could because you know who you are and you're aware of your power? And how do you want to get there? Like, how can we help and assist you getting to your next step where you really desire to go?
Oh, that's a difficult question, but a very good one. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think that um, There are a few things that I have on the table right now, which are new initiatives, new things. And I think what I really need to do is get the right people around me
Mhm,
because I've listened in the past too much to people telling me that I couldn't or I was wrong. And it's always difficult, isn't it? It's like, should I listen to people telling me that because they're smart? Maybe
mhm,
I'm wrong. And then the difference between, yeah, maybe that is wrong, or you can either listen to them too much or maybe not listen to the critics enough. And not finding that balance has always been a problem. And I think it is for a lot of women,
mhm,
quite easily bashed down.
mhm,
I think we need to, people, especially women over 50, that's the group that I can speak for now. I don't know what it's like to be 30 these days. That was a different era. But I think now we really need to stand our ground and make sure that we insist upon what it is that we need, whether it's funding, whether it's a
mhm,
platform, whether it's sponsorship, whatever it is, we need to just have faith in the fact that we're moving in the right direction and make those plans and go for them. And for me, it's about trying to gather people around me who will tell me, Lisl, you're wrong. And I know that it's meant kindly and helpfully, but who will also say, go you, when I need it. And I want to be there for other women as well, which is why I'm an angel investor in female and minority founded companies. And I'm really interested in supporting women in creating their own businesses. And also when people are in businesses and helping them be a success, if I can
mhm, mhm.
offer them some provocations, some insights, some experiences and questions. Because a lot of women know the answer, but they just need permission
Mm,
sometimes.
true.
And sometimes
Mhm.
it's giving people permission. And me too. Sometimes I need permission to just go ahead and do it. But that's okay. Get it. Surround yourself with the right people.
Oh, I just love that so much. And I am so grateful that you're joining us here today live on video. I just want to reinforce how valuable you are, how much people love you, how excited they were in the response I'm getting that you're speaking to people live. People really want to hear from you, and I hope you do a lot more of it.
Thank you. That's a really lovely thing to hear. And I appreciate it, Heather. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so we are at 12:50. So I'd like to open this up to Q&A. Mel, if you have any specific questions, you're welcome to ask them. And if there's anything on LinkedIn, Devon or True will drop it in the chat. Okay, so let's see if Mel can come online.
Hi, Mel.
If you can't, go ahead and drop it in the chat, Mel.
Come on, Mel. Let's see your face.
Okay, Mel, so you're going to receive an invite to unmute yourself. If you want to do that, you can hop on.
Hey, Mel.
And while we're waiting, okay, she's got a baby next to her. Do you have any questions while we're sitting here? If not, I have lots more. Okay, well, wait. She seems busy.
She is
So
busy. She has
she-
two kids and her own business, so she's
yeah,
got. Yeah.
she has her hands full. One question I have as someone who has dealt with a lot of very difficult experiences, especially in tech over the last few years. And of course, there's the usual being the only female in the room or not being given the promotion that I deserve is often what I have discovered is people who are just entering the field, especially women, do not understand the difficulty because they haven't had to go up for a promotion yet. And oh, you're exaggerating. Everybody, you're a problem. You're the squeaky wheel. And I'm like, come talk to me when you're ready for a raise. So, what would you say to females at different stages in their career as they come upon different levels of difficulty? Um, as far as addressing things like gaslighting from your superiors or other women who haven't yet had those experiences, um, and how to stand up for yourself without ending up, I mean, you're going to end up a pariah anyway, but doing it in a way where it's effective rather than creating a situation where you're completely pushed out. And maybe that can't be resolved.
It's a really good question, and I can relate to that intensely, actually. I mean, I've had some experiences back in the day which were highly traumatic, actually. And it's one of the reasons I left the UK was because of a couple of experiences I'd had. And that's why I went traveling and ended up staying away. It was
Mm,
that bad. So again, hard relate to that there. But I think I can't answer for other people because I think it does there's no one answer because it depends on your personality. So some people will do the whole don't let things bother you, you know, just go for it. And I mean, I have friends like that who are really quite they operate in a way which is very kind of like they're not easily offended. They'll just take things on the chin. They don't let that kind of get to them. And I would say that they're quite task oriented people. They're people who are very focused on an objective and an end, and they can just look at that and not let anything dissuade them from getting to where it is that they think they need to be.
mhm,
I'm not like that. I'm very like, oh no, somebody said that. And is it right? Is it not? And I'll be up till 4 o'clock in the morning wondering, you know,
mhm,
I mean, I'm getting better, but so I think a lot of how we react to these things depends on your own personality, and therefore the solution to that will probably depend on what type of person you are and how you operate. So, you know, when people said to me, "Oh, don't let words bother you," and I'm like, words are everything. Like, I will take a word and I will parse it to death. I will eat it. I will chew at it. I will know if somebody says something, you know, I mean, that's just who I am. So to say to me to ignore it is probably not the right path for me. Um, but there are other things that I do, like I try to think about the language that I use.
mm,
And there's a really good book that I was recommended to me about 10 years ago by a guy who was just this amazing guy who was an incredible negotiator. And it's about nonviolent communication.
mm,
And if you read a little bit about non-violent communication or read some of the books about crucial conversations, I don't know if you've heard of, there's a book, I forget who wrote it, I can let you know, but
mm.
crucial conversations. And it's interesting because it's about how you communicate when the stakes are like high,
Hi.
when
Yeah.
the emotion's high. And it gives you things that you can use and that you can say, and you can kind of adapt them for yourself. Don't not be yourself ever. No, you're you, and that's great. That you are good enough.
Mm,
But there are some tools and techniques that you can use to diffuse that situation. And also some things that you can do to learn ways of asking for things which you might
mm,
not inherently feel comfortable with, and find something that fits. Try a few of these things on and see what fits and works for you
mm,
when you're asking for, raises or promotions or
mhm, mhm,
conditions, etc. So I find that looking at these things, they're not manuals per se, but they give you different options, and you'll find something you think that could work for me. I could see myself using that.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so
I
uh,
I love it.
one of the things in Asia I learned, it might seem hard to believe because I am a chatter, I'm a typical Celt, but it was silence. The art of so the art where when people say things, say nothing.
Mm,
And in Asia, you can learn anything in like 2 minutes. Do you know how long 2 minutes of silence is? It feels
mhm,
like the equivalent of 1,000 years in
mhm,
Western, because we fill it. We fill it with we fill the silence. But learning to use silences, even in Western Europe, can be really effective in certain situations, just to let somebody sit and think about what they just said and not say anything. Just be it calm, just be peace with it, like the monk, be like a monk. Just
mm.
let them fill the silence next, because the person who speaks first loses.
Ooh, ooh, I love it. It's interesting just hearing you talk about that. I'm realizing these are all ways of stepping in and to go negotiating your own personal power. I think that's brilliant.
And it's different for all of us, right? There's no we're all different. So we all have to find something that works for us and
Mm,
our style and our emotions, our strengths.
yes. All right. I've got a question here for you. Mel has asked this question, and she, first of all, is saying how incredible you are. She wants to know, what are Liesel's future career plans?
Okay. Nosy Mel, as she calls herself. I love it because Mel is curious about people, which is why she's such a great copywriter because she
Mhm.
really tunes into how people talk and how people think. Thank you, Mel. Future career plans are I've got a couple of irons in the fire on a book, actually, two,
Ooh.
two books potentially. One of them is with a really impressive CFO on an area of entrepreneurship, and
Mm-hmm.
another one is something I'm doing on my own. I'm also looking at um, a couple of advisory and non-exec roles.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to step away from some things in recent times because you got to find the right fit. And sometimes you feel that either you're contributing and people don't value it, or you feel that maybe someone else would be better to provide what it is you think that business needs at that time. And I'm very happy doing that. I know what I can offer, and I also know people who can offer something different. But I'm also mentoring now, which is something that I didn't used to do because I wasn't sure that people's experience of me would be so great. I was
Oh.
always worried about what the other person's experience was. But I've been asked so often that I am doing some coaching,
Mm.
do mentoring of female founders and diverse startups because I'm passionate about that, and some creatives as well. Some Asian creatives are here, and because I kind of understand their background and where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm offering more um, in the area of mentoring and coaching, so people can reach out for that. And I have a couple of business things going on. My husband and I are working on. He's a lawyer, but he's okay. I have to say that as a lawyer. um, but we've got a couple of businesses that we're looking at starting. Completely different things. A little early to share because we don't want to share unless it's actually going to happen. So, but
Yes.
we're quite excited about that. We're off to Thailand and Tokyo on Monday for a
Mm-hmm.
few weeks over there.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to being back there and meeting up with some people over some projects over there too. So
I love it. You've got a fangirl here. Mel is so excited about the books. She's been asking about that through the podcast. I feel like she has spoken them into existence.
if only it were that easy.
Oh, true. Well, we are right on the hour. I'm going to ask for one more pass here if anyone has any closing questions. Uh, all right, Lisa. Well, I absolutely adore you. From the moment I met you, I just felt so much love for you and your mission and who you are and what you're doing. It's an incredible honor to be here with you. Would you please let the audience know where they can find you and how they can connect with you if they're interested in mentoring or buying your books? We're also going to do a breakout room once this conversation ends, so just hang on for a second. And I am just beyond honored to have you here.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here. I love what you guys are doing. And Heather, I think you're the work that you do in AI, I keep pointing people to it because when people start saying criticizing
Mhm.
what can be generated, I say you want emotion, you want creativity, you want something which is special. Go look at what Heather's doing because it's
Oh, jeez.
incredible.
Thank
And
you.
I think people should hear more from you also about, the ethics, the IP and stuff. So it's not just the creative side, but you've got the business side of that down, and it's just awesome.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. So tell me, where can people find you, Liesl?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I am Lisl, Lisl MacDonald, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me as Lisy Mac on Twitter. And you can book some time with me, ask me for some time. if you could be clear about what that is, because I get a lot of requests, especially from startups looking for help or funding or both. Um, but if you have something that you'd like to talk me about specifically, hit me up on LinkedIn and we can start a conversation and see if there's something we can do together. I do a lot of different things. I am the emergency red button that people push when they're not quite sure what to do. Push the button and I'll see what I can do.
Oh, I love it. And for the books that are coming out, is there going to be an announcement or how will people know?
They will know when I fulfill my part of the bargain. My writing partner is wonderful and he has done his next part, and I'm the one who's been a little bit delayed on that. So there will be announcements, but we have a little ways to go to get it finished and edit it. But he's a previously published writer several times, so I'm in such good hands and learning so much from him as we go along.
Right. Thank you so much, Lisl. I so appreciate you joining the Developing Life podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.